A single mother stood in a gas station parking lot with just $8 in her hand. Money was her daughter's breakfast for the next morning. Then a Hell's Angel biker collapsed in front of her, dying. Everyone told her to walk away. They warned her. They said don't get involved. But she spent her last $8.00 to save his life. And the next morning, 100 motorcycles surrounded her house. What happened next changed her life forever. Sienna Clark stood under the harsh white glow of the gas station lights, the kind that made everything look colder than it really was. The pavement beneath her feet was stained with old oil and tire marks, and the night air smelled faintly of gasoline and dust. She held 8 crumpled dollars in her hand, folded and unfolded so many times the paper felt soft, almost fragile. This was all she had left. $8 to get her daughter through breakfast in the morning, maybe stretch it into something small for dinner if she was careful. She pressed the bills together, trying not to think about the knot in her stomach or the way worry had become a permanent weight in her chest over the last few years. She had done the math 100 times on the walk home. Rent was due, the inhaler was almost empty, the electricity notice was still taped to the fridge like a quiet threat. $8 wasn't much, but it was survival. It was one more morning where Maya wouldn't have to ask why there was nothing to eat. Sienna had learned to measure life in small victories like that. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the night's usual silence. A sharp, broken gasp, followed by another, weaker this time. She froze. Her eyes scanned the parking lot, and that's when she saw him. A massive man near the far pump, his body swaying as if the ground itself had turned unsteady beneath him. He reached out toward his motorcycle, fingers grasping at air, and then he collapsed hard onto the concrete. For a second, Sienna didn't move. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She took an instinctive step back, already telling herself this wasn't her problem. She was tired, she was broke, she had a child waiting at home. The man on the ground was huge, covered in tattoos, wearing a black leather vest that made her stomach tighten with unease. Everything about him screamed danger, trouble, the kind of thing people warned you to stay away from. But then she saw his face. The color was draining fast, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to pull air out of a world that had suddenly run out of it. His chest heaved once, then stuttered. The sound that came from him wasn't loud, but it cut straight through her. She had heard that sound before, years ago, on a sidewalk when her grandmother collapsed and strangers walked past pretending not to notice. Her hand tightened around the $8. She thought of Maya asleep in their small apartment, her hair spread across the pillow, her breathing soft and even. She thought of how carefully she had planned that money, how there was no room for mistakes anymore. She could walk away right now. No one would blame her. No one would even know. But her feet didn't move. Her body leaned forward instead, pulled by something deeper than fear or logic. She took a step toward the man, then another, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was the moment. The kind of moment people never think will happen to them until it does. The kind where you realize how thin the line is between the life you planned and the one that suddenly demands something from you. She knelt beside him, the cold concrete seeping through her jeans, and for a split second, she looked back at her hand, at the money that represented everything she had left. $8. Breakfast. Safety. Tomorrow. Then she looked at the man again, his lips tinged blue, his breathing shallow and uneven, and the choice stopped feeling like a choice at all. Everyone says walk away. The gas station door creaked open behind her, and a voice cut through the night, sharp, annoyed, edged with warning. The attendant stood in the doorway, cigarette glowing between his fingers as he took in the scene. His eyes flicked from the man on the ground to Sienna, and his expression hardened. "Don't get involved," he said, not even lowering his voice. "Those guys are nothing but trouble." Sienna turned toward him, her pulse roaring in her ears. "He needs help," she said, her voice tighter than she meant it to be. "He's not breathing right." The attendant took another drag, exhaled slowly. "Lady, you don't know who that is," he replied. "You want problems in your life? That's how you get them." As if summoned by the tension, another customer stepped out of the store, an older man with a trucker hat pulled low over his brow. He stopped short when he saw the biker on the ground, recognition flashing across his face. He shook his head immediately, the gesture heavy with judgment. "You should leave," he said, softer than the attendant but no less firm. "People like him, they're dangerous. You got a kid, don't..." The words hit harder than she expected. How did he know? Maybe it was the way she carried herself, the exhaustion etched into her face, the way worry clung to her like a second skin. She felt suddenly exposed, like the whole world could see exactly how much she had to lose. "I can't just leave him," she said, but doubt crept into her voice now. She could feel it, that familiar pressure to shrink, to listen, to not make waves. The older man sighed, disappointment and fear mixing in his eyes. "Miss, I'm telling you for your own good," he said. "Walk away. Let someone else deal with it. Someone else." The words echoed as the man turned and walked to his car, engine starting, headlights sweeping briefly across the lot before disappearing into the night. The attendant went back inside without another glance, the door shutting behind him with a final click that felt like abandonment. Sienna was alone now. Alone with the man on the ground, alone with the sound of his labored breathing, alone with the weight of everyone else's fear pressing down on her. She could still walk away. No one was stopping her. In fact, everyone had told her she should. Her gaze drifted back to the gas station window where her reflection stared back at her. She looked small in the glass, tired, worn down, someone the world expected very little from, someone who was supposed to know her place and stay out of trouble. She looked down at the man again, at the rise and fall of his chest slowing, at the way his hand twitched weakly against the pavement. In that moment, the warnings blurred together into background noise. All she could hear was her grandmother's voice in her memory, steady and warm, telling her that kindness was sometimes the only thing you had to give. Her hands stopped shaking. The fear didn't disappear, but it shifted, making room for something else. Resolve. She leaned closer to the man, blocking out the empty parking lot, the closed door, the people who had chosen not to see. Her choice had already been made, even if the consequences were still unknown. As Sienna knelt there, the sounds of the gas station seemed to fade into something distant and unreal, like she was underwater. The buzzing fluorescent lights blurred into a dull hum, and the smell of fuel mixed with cold night air made her stomach churn. Her eyes stayed on the man's face, but her mind slipped backward in time, pulled by a memory she tried not to visit too often. It came uninvited, sharp and vivid, the way painful memories always do. She was 12 again, standing on a cracked city sidewalk, clutching her school backpack too tightly. Her grandmother lay on the concrete a few feet away, her body twisted at an unnatural angle, one arm stretched out as if reaching for help that never came. Sienna remembered the sound her grandmother made, not loud, not dramatic, just a soft, desperate noise that carried more fear than words ever could. People walked past, shoes stepped around her body, someone glanced down then looked away. A woman crossed the street to avoid them entirely. Sienna had screamed for help back then. She remembered her voice breaking, the panic rising when no one stopped. An old man shook his head and kept walking. A couple pretended they didn't hear. Someone muttered that it wasn't their problem. By the time an ambulance finally arrived, it was too late. The doctors said a faster response might have changed everything. Might have. That word had followed Sienna into adulthood, into every hard decision she ever made. Now, kneeling on cold pavement years later, that memory wrapped itself around her chest. She saw the same fear on this man's face that she'd seen on her grandmother's, the same helplessness, the same silent plea that didn't come with words but demanded an answer anyway. Her throat tightened. and for a moment tears burned behind her eyes. She pressed her lips together, forcing herself to breathe. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice, calm even in memory. "Kindness costs nothing, baby. Sometimes it's all we've got." The words had always sounded simple when her grandmother said them, like an easy truth anyone could live by. Sienna knew better now. She knew kindness could cost everything. It could cost money you didn't have, safety you couldn't afford to risk, comfort you desperately needed. It could cost you the approval of people who thought they knew better. Her hands trembled as she hovered over the man, unsure what to do next. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't trained for this. She was just a tired mother who had walked miles that day and would walk miles again tomorrow. But she was here, and that mattered. She leaned closer, speaking softly, even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, the way it had when she'd spoken to Maya during thunderstorms or bad dreams. The memory of that sidewalk refused to let her stand up and walk away. It anchored her there, heavy and unavoidable. She had lived with the weight of not being able to save someone once. She wasn't sure she could live with choosing not to try again. Around her, the world stayed indifferent. Cars passed on the street beyond the station. The attendant stayed inside. No sirens cut through the night. Nothing dramatic happened to mark this moment as important. But inside Sienna, something shifted. The fear of tomorrow didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. The image of her grandmother's still face pushed her forward, urging her to act instead of freeze. She reached into her pocket, feeling the familiar fold of the bills, and her heart sank as she realized exactly what she was about to give up. The memory didn't make the choice easier. It made it unavoidable. She spends her last $8.00. Sienna pushed herself up from the ground and ran toward the gas station door, her legs moving on instinct. The bell above the door chimed sharply as she burst inside, startling the attendant. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face, but she didn't slow down. Her eyes scanned the shelves with desperate focus, skipping over candy bars and chips until they landed on what she needed. Aspirin. Bottled water. Her heart raced as she grabbed both, her fingers fumbling slightly as if they already knew the weight of what this meant. She hurried to the counter and set them down hard, the plastic bottles clattering against the surface. The attendant raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. He rang them up slowly, deliberately, as if dragging out the moment might make her reconsider. Sienna pulled the $8 from her pocket and laid them on the counter, flattening the crumpled bills with her palm. For a split second she stared at them, at the way they looked so small against the scratched countertop. $8. The last of it. The attendant counted out the change and slid $1 and some coins back toward her. She didn't even look at it. She snatched the aspirin and water and turned, already moving before the register drawer closed. When she ran back outside, the man was still on the ground, his chest rising unevenly, each breath a struggle. She dropped to her knees again, the plastic crinkling loudly in the quiet lot as she twisted the bottle cap off. Her hands shook harder now, adrenaline flooding her system. She popped the aspirin bottle open, shaking 2 tablets into her palm the way she'd seen people do on television, hoping she remembered right. "Hey," she said softly, leaning close. "I need you to chew these, okay?" His eyes fluttered, unfocused, but they opened just enough for her to see the fear there. She placed the tablets on his tongue, her fingers brushing his lips for half a second. "Chew slowly." She opened the water and brought it to his mouth, careful not to tilt it too much. He swallowed with difficulty, coughing weakly, and she held the bottle steady, murmuring encouragement, the way she did with Maya when she was sick. "Stay with me. Help is coming. You're not alone." The words poured out of her without thought, a lifeline she hoped he could grab onto. As she worked, the reality of what she'd done pressed in on her. Tomorrow morning there would be no cereal to stretch, no milk to ration. There would be questions she didn't know how to answer yet. She felt a stab of guilt so sharp it almost made her gasp. For a fleeting moment she imagined Maya's face, when she realized breakfast would be crackers and water, and her chest tightened painfully. But the man's hand moved then, rough fingers closing weakly around hers. The contact grounded her. She squeezed back, anchoring him, anchoring herself. This was real. This was happening. The money was gone, but her choice was here, tangible and irreversible. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder, and relief washed through her so suddenly her eyes stung. She kept her hand on his shoulder, steady and warm as the sound drew closer. The fear didn't leave her, but it changed shape, mixing with something else that felt dangerously like hope. The asphalt was cold, her knees ached, and the night pressed in around them, but she stayed right where she was, counting his breaths, whispering reassurance, feeling the weight of the empty pocket against her leg, and knowing there was no turning back. The sirens cut through the night like a blade, growing louder with every second, and Sienna felt her shoulders sag with a relief she hadn't realized she was holding back. Red and blue lights flashed against the gas station walls, bouncing off chrome and glass, turning the quiet lot into something surreal. She stayed kneeling beside the man as the ambulance screeched to a stop, her hand still on his shoulder, her fingers numb from the cold and the adrenaline. The paramedics moved fast. Doors flew open, boots hit pavement, and suddenly the space around them filled with voices and motion. One of them dropped to his knees on the other side of the man, fingers immediately at his neck, eyes focused and calm. Another pulled equipment from the back, oxygen, monitors, a stretcher. Sienna leaned back instinctively to give them room, her heart pounding as she watched professionals take over. "Did anyone give him aspirin?" one of them asked, already snapping gloves onto his hands. "It did," Sienna said quickly, her voice shaky but clear. "2 tablets, a few minutes ago." The paramedic looked up at her, eyebrows lifting slightly. He nodded once, sharp and approving. "Good call," he said. "That probably made all the difference." The words hit her harder than she expected. Probably made all the difference. She swallowed, suddenly aware of how close this had been, how easily this night could have ended very differently. The oxygen mask was placed over the man's face, his chest rising more steadily now, and the beeping of the monitor felt like the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The man's eyes opened, clearer this time. He turned his head slightly, searching, until his gaze found Sienna. For a moment everything else faded again. The noise, the lights, the people. Just the two of them, connected by the thin thread of what she'd done. His lips moved under the mask, and she leaned closer to hear him. "You saved me," he whispered, the words rough and barely audible. Sienna shook her head without thinking. "Not yet," she said softly. "They've got you now." But he didn't look convinced. His hand lifted weakly, fingers brushing against her sleeve before gripping it, surprisingly firm for someone who had been so close to slipping away. His eyes held hers, intense despite the exhaustion weighing them down. "You stayed," he murmured. "No one stays." Something twisted in her chest at that. She squeezed his hand gently, the way she would have with anyone scared and hurting. "You're going to be okay," she said, even though she wasn't sure yet. "Just keep breathing." Another motorcycle roared into the lot, the sound loud and aggressive compared to the ambulance's steady hum. A younger man jumped off before the engine fully died, helmet tossed aside as he ran toward them. His face went pale when he saw the man on the ground. "Hawk," he breathed, dropping to his knees on the other side. "Oh my God, Hawk!" The way he said the name told Sienna everything. This wasn't just anyone. This was someone important to him, someone he loved. The younger man's eyes snapped to her, wide and disbelieving. "Did you help him?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. "He needed it," Sienna said simply, because there was nothing else to say. The paramedics lifted Hawk onto the stretcher, securing straps, checking vitals one last time. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, Hawk reached out again, catching Sienna's wrist. His grip was weak but deliberate. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with something deeper than gratitude. "I won't forget this." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The doors closed, sirens rising again as the ambulance pulled away, lights disappearing down the street. The parking lot felt suddenly too quiet, like the world had exhaled and left her standing there alone with the aftermath. The younger man stood up slowly, running a hand through his hair as he watched the ambulance go. He turned back to Sienna, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Most people cross the street when they see us," he said quietly. "They pretend we don't exist." Sienna shrugged, unsure how to respond. "I just saw a man who needed help." He reached into his wallet, pulling out a thick stack of bills, peeling some off without counting. "Please," he said, holding them out, "for the aspirin, for your time, for everything." Sienna took a step back immediately, her hands coming up between them. "No," she said, firm. "I don't want your money." He blinked, clearly not expecting that. "You spent your own?" he insisted. "At least let me pay you back." "I didn't do it for money," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping in. "I wouldn't have helped if I was expecting something." The younger man stared at her, the bills still in his hand, confusion giving way to something like respect. Slowly he lowered his arm and tucked the money back into his wallet. "People usually want something," he said, "especially when it costs them." Sienna thought of the empty cabinet at home, of the questions waiting for her in the morning. "I know what it costs," she replied. "That's why it matters." He studied her face as if trying to commit it to memory, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white card. There was a simple logo on it, a crown with wings, and a phone number beneath. He held it out to her, not pushing it into her hand this time, just offering. "My name's Cole," he said. "Hawk's going to want to see you. Call this tomorrow." She hesitated, then took the card, the smooth paper cool against her skin. I don't think that's necessary." Cole shook his head gently. "For him it is?" She nodded, slipping the card into her pocket, already planning to forget about it as soon as she got home. Cole mounted his motorcycle, pausing before putting his helmet on. "You're a good person," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Then he was gone, the engine fading into the night, leaving Sienna standing under the buzzing lights with a handful of coins in her pocket and the weight of what she'd refused settling over her. She felt strangely hollow, like something had been taken from her and replaced with something she didn't quite understand yet. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every step reminded her of the money she no longer had, of the thin margin she lived on. She replayed the night over and over in her mind, the warnings, the choice, the way Hawk's hand had gripped hers. Doubt crept in as the adrenaline wore off. Had she been reckless? Naive? What if something went wrong later and they blamed her? When she reached her apartment, the building was dark and quiet. She slipped inside, careful not to wake Maya, her shoes heavy in her hands. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at the counter, the empty space where tomorrow's breakfast should have been. The reality hit her then, sharp and undeniable. She had nothing left. No backup plan, no extra dollars hidden away. She pulled the card from her pocket and set it down on the table, looking at it like it might bite. A crown with wings. A phone number. People like that didn't just hand out cards without expectations. She pushed it aside, telling herself she didn't owe anyone anything. The next day blurred into a familiar rhythm of exhaustion and worry. Sienna moved through her hours on autopilot, her body going through motions her mind barely registered. Folding clothes, pouring coffee, smiling when she was supposed to. The questions about breakfast had come just as she feared, and she'd answered them with a forced cheerfulness that left her drained. By the afternoon, the weight of the card in her pocket felt heavier than it should have. She kept touching it, reassuring herself it was still there, then reminding herself she didn't need it. She didn't want to owe a debt she couldn't repay. When she finally pulled it out again, her fingers hovered over her phone. She stared at the number for a long time, her heart racing as if she were about to do something dangerous. Calling felt like crossing another line, stepping into a world she didn't belong in. But something about Hawk's eyes the night before, the certainty in his voice, wouldn't let her ignore it. She typed out a short message, erased it, typed it again. "Hi, this is Sienna. Cole gave me your number." She stared at the screen, then hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The reply came faster than she expected. The phone rang almost immediately, making her jump. She let it go to voicemail, her nerves screaming at her to slow down. When she listened, Cole's voice filled the quiet room, calm but insistent. "Hawk wants to see you today. Please come, it's important." Sienna sat down heavily in the nearest chair, her legs suddenly weak. Important. The word echoed in her head as she stared at the scuffed floor, the peeling paint, the life she knew so well. She thought about the money she'd refused, the way Cole's hand had hesitated before putting it away. She wondered what would have happened if she'd taken it, how much easier this morning would have been. But she also knew why she hadn't. Taking it would have changed something. It would have turned a moment of humanity into a transaction, something measurable and finite. By refusing, she'd left it open, undefined, something that couldn't be settled with cash and a thank you. As she stood up to get ready to leave, uncertainty twisted in her stomach. She didn't know what Hawk wanted or what walking into that diner would mean for her life. She only knew that the choice she'd made the night before hadn't ended when the ambulance drove away. It was still unfolding, pulling her forward into consequences she couldn't yet see, consequences that began the moment she said no to the money and chose to walk away with empty hands and a full heart. The next morning, the air on Sienna's street felt different, heavier somehow, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. She noticed it the moment she stepped outside with Maya, the way curtains twitched and doors stayed firmly shut. Mrs. Johnson stood on her porch, arms crossed tight against her chest, her mouth set in a thin line. When she saw Sienna, she didn't smile. "I heard what you did last night," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice low but sharp. "Helping one of those biker men, Hell's Angels." Sienna felt her stomach drop. "He was having a heart attack," she said quietly. "I couldn't just leave him." Mrs. Johnson shook her head slowly, disappointment etched deep into her face. "Child, you got a little girl to think about. Those people bring trouble wherever they go. You don't invite that into your life." Others began to gather, drawn by the tension. Mr. Rodriguez from 3 doors down frowned openly. A young mother pulled her kids closer when Sienna walked past. Whispers followed her like shadows, reckless, naive, dangerous. Maya squeezed her hand, sensing something was wrong. By afternoon, fear had turned into anger. People talked openly now, voices raised. Someone mentioned calling the police if bikers showed up. Someone else said they were keeping their kids inside. Sienna felt smaller with every step, like the ground beneath her feet no longer belonged to her. She wondered if they were right, if kindness really could be a mistake. Then the sound came, a deep, rolling thunder that shook the windows. Engines, not 1 or 2, but dozens. Sienna rushed to the window, her heart slamming against her ribs. The street was lined with motorcycles as far as she could see, chrome gleaming in the morning light, riders standing beside them in perfect formation. Gasps rippled through the block. Doors slammed. Someone screamed to call 911. Maya clutched Sienna's leg, crying, "Mommy, I'm scared." Neighbors poured outside, panic written on their faces. Mrs. Johnson's phone was already to her ear. Mr. Rodriguez rounded on Sienna, his face red. "What did you do? You brought them here. You put all of us in danger." The crowd pressed closer, fear turning sharp and accusing. Sienna pulled Maya into her arms, shaking now, her chest tight as the sound of engines idled around them. She searched the line of bikers for something, anything, that would explain why they were here, and wondered if this was the moment everything finally fell apart. The tension on the street shifted the moment Hawk stepped forward, moving slowly but deliberately, his presence quieting the chaos without a word. He raised one hand, not in command but in reassurance, and the bikers behind him followed his lead, engines cutting off one by one until the street fell into an uneasy silence. Cole stepped beside him and spoke clearly, his voice carrying without shouting, explaining why they were there, who Hawk was, and what Lily's legacy had been doing for years. As he spoke, faces in the crowd changed. Fear softened into confusion, confusion into recognition. Someone whispered a name, then another voice spoke up, recalling a family helped, a bill paid, a home saved. The story the neighbors had built in their minds began to crack under the weight of truth. Hawk turned toward Sienna then, pointing not to himself or the bikers but to her. He told them about the gas station, about the heart attack, about the $8 meant for a child's breakfast. His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. Every word landed heavy. Silence spread through the crowd as people realized what they had judged without knowing. Mrs. Johnson's phone lowered slowly. Mr. Rodriguez's anger drained from his face, replaced by shame. One by one, neighbors stepped forward, apologies spilling out awkwardly, hands extending where accusations had been moments before. Sienna stood, frozen, Maya still clinging to her, as respect replaced fear, and the same people who had turned on her now looked at her like she had shown them something they had forgotten how to see. The envelope felt heavier than it should have in Sienna's hands, thick paper pressing against her trembling fingers as Hawk held it out to her. She stared at it without opening it, her mind lagging behind the moment, as if reality had suddenly sped up and left her struggling to catch her breath. Around her, the street buzzed with murmurs and shifting feet, neighbors watching closely now, not with fear but with something like awe. Hawk nodded once, encouraging, and she finally slid a finger under the flap. The number on the check didn't make sense at first. Her eyes skimmed it, then went back, reading it again more slowly. $25,000. The world tilted. She felt heat rush to her face, her knees weakening as the meaning settled in. Rent. Bills. The inhaler. Food. All the quiet panic she carried with her every day suddenly collided with the possibility that it didn't have to be this way anymore. She shook her head, breath catching, the sound of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. "This isn't charity," Hawk said gently, as if he could see the storm inside her. "It's gratitude." Before she could respond, Cole stepped forward with another envelope, thinner but just as heavy in its own way. Inside was a letter on crisp letterhead, words neat and official: community outreach coordinator, salary, benefits, health insurance. Sienna read it once, then again, her hands shaking so badly she had to press the paper against her chest to steady it. A job that paid more than both her jobs combined, a job that didn't require worn-out shoes and endless miles. A job that meant choosing between groceries and medicine would never happen again. A sound escaped her that was half laugh, half sob. She dropped to her knees without realizing she was doing it, the envelope slipping from her grasp. Maya knelt beside her immediately, small hands clutching at her jacket, eyes wide with confusion and concern. "Mommy?" she whispered. Sienna pulled her close, burying her face in her daughter's hair, breathing her in, grounding herself in the reality of her weight and warmth. "Happy tears," she managed, her voice breaking. "They're happy tears." Applause rippled through the crowd, hesitant at first, then growing louder as neighbors joined in, some wiping their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward, her earlier sternness gone, replaced by something raw and apologetic. She wrapped her arms around Sienna tightly, murmuring words that blurred together, regret and pride tangled in her voice. Mr. Rodriguez followed, clearing his throat awkwardly before offering a quiet apology, his gaze fixed on the ground. Then there was more. A set of car keys appeared in Hawk's hand, metal glinting in the sunlight. He explained calmly, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, that her car had been retrieved, repaired, made roadworthy again. Sienna stared at the keys, remembering the long walks, the aching feet, the way distance had shaped her days. The idea of turning an ignition and simply going where she needed felt almost unreal. As if the morning hadn't already stretched beyond anything she could have imagined, the trailer doors opened. Boxes came out, one after another, carried by bikers and neighbors alike. Furniture, groceries, clothes folded neatly in plastic, a small pink bicycle that made Maya gasp and clap her hands in pure, unfiltered joy. Sienna watched it all unfold like a dream she was afraid to wake from, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Inside the apartment, everything changed in a matter of hours. The old couch was gone, replaced by something solid and clean. The wobbly table gave way to a sturdy dining set. Maya's mattress on the floor became a real bed with a frame, bright sheets, pillows that smelled new. Sienna moved from room to room in a daze, touching surfaces as if to confirm they were real. Hawk sat with her for a while, explaining the roles she'd been offered, what the work would involve, how much he believed she was right for it. "You know what it's like to need help," he said simply. "That matters." She nodded, wiping her face, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Not relief alone, but purpose. The sense that everything she'd endured might finally mean something beyond survival. When he mentioned that the health coverage would fully cover Maya's asthma medication, no exceptions, Sienna broke again, her shoulders shaking as months of fear poured out of her in silent sobs. The days that followed moved quickly, but they didn't blur. Each one felt distinct, intentional. Sienna resigned from her old jobs, hugged Linda tight, promised to visit. She stepped into her new role with a nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years, sitting at a desk with her name on it, reading applications from people whose stories echoed her own. She visited families, listened more than she spoke, recognized the look in their eyes because she had worn it herself. Maya thrived. She slept better, she laughed more. Her inhaler sat on the counter, always full, no longer a source of quiet dread. Mornings became gentler, less rushed, less heavy. For the first time in a long while, Sienna caught herself thinking about the future without immediately bracing for disappointment. The neighborhood changed, too. Where there had once been closed curtains and whispered judgments, there was now conversation, help offered without being asked. The vacant lot down the street transformed into a construction site, then into something solid and welcoming. Clark House rose piece by piece, and Sienna stood at the groundbreaking ceremony with a shovel in her hands, Maya beside her, cameras clicking as Hawk spoke about community and second chances. The work wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of other people's struggles pressed hard against her, when the stories followed her home and settled in her bones. But there was also progress. A veteran placed in housing, a mother who could finally afford surgery for her child, an elderly neighbor who no longer cut pills in half. Each success stitched something back together inside her. Months passed. Lily's legacy expanded, the ripple effect growing wider than Sienna could have imagined. She led a small team now, people who had once been on the other side of the desk, now helping others find their footing. Hawk recovered fully, visiting centers, shaking hands, telling Lily's story with quiet pride. The video of that morning on the street went viral, bringing both praise and criticism. Sienna read the comments at first, then learned to stop. What mattered were the faces she saw every day, the lives slowly, steadily changing. Clark House opened its doors, and the building filled with voices, movement, purpose. Maya cut the ribbon, with her beaming, her laughter echoing through halls that hadn't existed a year earlier. On the anniversary of that night at the gas station, Sienna stood in front of a crowd, her hand steady now, her voice clear as she spoke about choices and fear and kindness. She talked about $8 and a man on the ground and a decision that had felt small at the time. Applause washed over her, warm and sustained, and she caught sight of Hawk in the back, smiling. Later, walking home alone, she passed another gas station. A young man sat on the curb, head in his hands, panic written across his face. Sienna slowed, then stopped. She listened. She reached into her purse and handed him money, along with a card, her instructions simple and familiar. He stared at her like she'd just changed his life, tears welling up as he thanked her again and again. She walked on, heart full, the city lights stretching ahead of her, knowing exactly where this path had begun, knowing that somewhere, in moments both big and small, it would begin again. If this story made you feel something, don't let it end here. Stories like this matter because they remind us who we can be when it counts. If you believe kindness still has power, if you believe people deserve second chances, then this channel is for you. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story that could change the way you see the world. Hit the like button so this message reaches someone who needs it today. Share this video with one person who still believes humanity is worth fighting for. And tell me in the comments, have you ever faced a moment where a small choice changed everything? I read every comment, and your story might inspire the next one we tell. Stay here, stay kind, and remember, sometimes all it takes to change a life is the courage to act when no one else will.